Imagine waking up one day and realizing that your life has been quietly orchestrated by forces you never named, choices you never questioned, and shadows you never dared to confront. You go through the motions: work, relationships, routines, believing yourself to be free, rational, in control. But beneath that surface, a silent director has been pulling the strings. You smile when you're supposed to, hesitate when unseen chains tighten, and choose paths that feel safe. Not because they are truly yours, but because something deep and hidden demanded it. What if the life you believe is authentically yours is nothing more than an echo of everything you've tried to avoid? What if the fears, desires, and memories you've buried, those dismissed moments you told yourself didn't matter, are the very architects of the person you became? This thought alone is unsettling, that the you protect, defend, and project might be just a carefully woven mask, a mask designed not by your conscious will, but by shadows you refuse to see. Consider this paradox: the more you try to live freely, the more enslaved you might be by what remains hidden. The more you fight to escape your pain, the more it becomes the silent compass guiding your steps. You might think you're running from the darkness, yet with each sprint, the darkness maps your direction, ensuring you never truly leave its gravity. Ask yourself, have you ever noticed patterns that repeat, wounds that never seem to heal, mistakes that circle back like vultures over a carcass? Perhaps a toxic relationship that mirrors the very one you swore you'd never repeat, or the subtle envy you feel when you see someone succeed in a way you secretly wish you could, or that gnawing emptiness after every small victory, as if no achievement is ever enough to fill the void. These are not accidents. They are not random quirks of personality. They are shadows, and shadows are patient teachers. They will follow you silently until you acknowledge them. Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." What if the destiny you keep resigning yourself to, the job you tolerate, the relationships that drain you, the endless search for meaning has less to do with chance and more to do with the inner exiles you've ignored? But here's the paradox that keeps you restless. You think of yourself as a seeker of truth. You crave authenticity. You want clarity, peace, purpose. And yet, when the shadows begin to reveal themselves, you avert your gaze. You tell yourself, not now, not me, not this. You numb the whispers with distraction, with endless scrolling, with the intoxicating comfort of shallow pleasures. Why? Because the truth terrifies you more than the illusion. And somewhere within you, you already know, facing the shadows means dismantling everything you thought you were. But can you afford not to look? Imagine standing at the edge of a cliff at night. Behind you lies the familiar land you've walked 1,000 times, the safe, predictable ground. Before you lies an abyss, silent and unknowable. Yet in that abyss hides the key to the chains that bind you. Would you step forward, even if it meant letting go of the person you've always believed yourself to be? Or would you cling to the comfort of the mask, repeating the cycle, forever haunted by the feeling that something vital has been left unseen? The question presses deeper. What if your greatest enemy isn't the world outside, but the parts of yourself you've locked away? The rage you deny, the weakness you hide, the longing you bury. What if those shadows, rather than your enemies, are your only path to wholeness? Here lies the great contradiction. The self you protect is the very prison you inhabit. The self you fear, the shadows you silence, are the very doorway to freedom. So now the question is unavoidable. Will you keep walking blind, letting the unseen shape you in silence? Or will you dare to look into the darkness, knowing it may unravel everything you've known, yet give birth to who you truly are? The choice is yours, but the shadows are waiting, always. And to see them, truly see them, is where the journey must begin. The hidden problem and its psychological, philosophical roots. Why do we run from the very truths that could set us free? Why do we pretend not to hear the whispers within us? The quiet protests of pain, the unresolved conflicts, the haunting memories that refuse to die. The problem is not that shadows exist. The problem is that we are conditioned, almost from birth, to deny them. From the moment you entered this world, you were given invisible instructions. Be good, be strong, be acceptable. Every culture has its own version of this script, but the essence is always the same: cut away the parts of yourself that don't fit the story others want you to live. You were told not to cry too much, not to be too angry, not to show too much need. You learned that love, approval, and belonging were conditional, and the price of admission was self-betrayal. So you began to exile parts of yourself. A child who was scolded for being too loud grows into an adult who suppresses their voice. A teenager mocked for sensitivity becomes an adult who hides their tenderness beneath armor. A young person shamed for failure learns to chase perfection, not out of joy, but out of fear. Piece by piece, you carved away the raw living truth of who you are, until all that remained was a curated mask that could survive in the world. But what happens to those exiled fragments? They do not vanish. They retreat into the unconscious, gathering strength. In silence, influencing your choices in ways you can't see. Jung called this the shadow, the sum of all you repress, deny, or reject within yourself. To deny it is not to erase it, but to give it power. Nietzsche once wrote, "One must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star." Yet we fear our chaos, so we bury it. We want only the polished, the orderly, the acceptable. But life is not order alone. To reject your chaos is to reject the very fire that could ignite your becoming. And so, you stumble through life half asleep, not because you lack intelligence or ambition, but because you are split. The conscious self, what you present to the world, walks in one direction, while the unconscious, the shadow, pulls you toward another. This inner division breeds confusion, restlessness, even despair. Arthur Schopenhauer saw this clearly when he spoke of the will to life, that blind, irrational force that drives us. You think you're making rational decisions, but in truth, much of what you do is guided by hidden forces, a hunger for validation, a fear of rejection, an inherited script you never wrote. The hidden problem, then, is not merely personal, it is structural. It is the way human beings are wired. We are not creatures of pure reason, but battlegrounds of instinct, memory, and buried emotion. Look closer, and you'll see this problem everywhere. Why does someone sabotage their own success at the very moment they are about to achieve it? Why does another cling to relationships that wound them, even when they know better? Why does a person who swears they want peace find themselves addicted to conflict? The answer is not found in logic alone. It is found in the shadow. The unconscious, left unacknowledged, manipulates from the dark. It whispers in your choices. It seeps into your emotions. It disguises itself as fate. You think, this is just who I am. But is it really? Or is it who you became when you learned that certain truths about you were unacceptable? Aldous Huxley once warned of the doors of perception that remain closed until we dare to alter our vision. The shadow is one such door. To open it is terrifying because it means admitting that your story is incomplete, that you are not who you thought you were. And yet, to keep it closed is to remain enslaved to forces you cannot name. The roots of this problem stretch deep into psychology, but also into philosophy. Jean-Paul Sartre spoke of bad faith, the self-deception we practice to avoid the burden of freedom. To live authentically is terrifying because it requires us to confront the abyss of choice. So instead, we pretend. We tell ourselves stories that soothe but do not liberate. We cling to the roles society gave us, even when they suffocate us, because the alternative, the responsibility of becoming who we truly are, feels unbearable. And Viktor Frankl, who endured the horrors of the concentration camps, observed that human beings can endure almost anything except the absence of meaning. When shadows are denied, meaning collapses. Life becomes a hollow performance, a treadmill of survival without depth. You feel the emptiness, but you don't know why. You think, maybe I just need more success, more love, more distraction. But the real hunger is not for more, it is for wholeness. Here lies the hidden problem. We are at war with ourselves, and we call this war normal life. We exile parts of who we are, then wonder why we feel incomplete. We silence the inner voice, then wonder why we feel unheard. We bury the shadow, then wonder why life feels like a ghost story. The cruelest irony, what you fear in yourself is not your enemy, is your unclaimed power. Your anger may contain the seed of courage. Your envy may point to your deepest, unspoken desires. Your weakness may carry the wisdom of humility. But until you face these shadows, they remain distorted, haunting you instead of guiding you. The philosophers, the psychologists, the mystics all have pointed toward this truth in different ways. The human problem is not the shadow itself, but our refusal to see it. The tragedy is not that we are divided, but that we insist on pretending we are whole. And so the question lingers, sharper now, what happens to a life lived in denial of its own depths? What becomes of a society built on the exile of the shadow? The consequences are closer than you think, and they shape not just your inner life, but the entire world you inhabit. The unseen is not harmless, and soon you will see what it creates. The unseen consequences. The hidden problem may seem like a quiet internal struggler, private war waged in the chambers of your mind. But shadows do not remain contained. What you refuse to face within yourself spills outward, shaping your relationships, your work, your choices, even the society you live in. The unseen consequences are everywhere, like cracks spreading across the foundation of a house that looks stable from the outside but trembles within. Think of how you carry your shadow into love. You tell yourself you are looking for a partner who will complete you, who will give you the love you were once denied. But what you often seek is not a partner, is a mirror. Without knowing it, you are drawn to people who reflect your unresolved wounds. The father who abandoned you reappears in the partner who is emotionally distant. The childhood humiliation echoes in the partner who belittles you. You swear you'll never repeat the past, and yet the past has already written the script. Until you face the shadow, you are condemned to act it out on the stage of your relationships. Or consider work. You think you are driven by passion, ambition, the desire to succeed. But how much of that drive is truly yours? How much of it is the desperate attempt to silence the inner voice that whispers, "You are not enough"? Every promotion, every achievement, every victory feels triumphant in the moment, yet strangely hollow the next day. You chase the next prize, convinced that this one will fill the void. But the void is not outside you, it is the shadow you've left unclaimed. Society, too, is not immune. What we repress collectively becomes the machinery of our culture. Look at the obsession with endless productivity. Beneath it lies the shadow of inadequacy. the unspoken fear that stillness would expose our emptiness. Look at the culture of image filters, curated lives, constant performance. Beneath it lies the shadow of shame, the terror of being seen as we truly are. Look at the politics of fear, division, and hatred. Beneath it lies the shadow of collective denial, what a society refuses to acknowledge within itself. It projects onto an enemy. Psychology names this process projection. It is the mind's trick of taking what you cannot accept within and casting it onto others. The anger you won't own becomes their aggression. The desire you suppress becomes their corruption. The fear you deny becomes their threat. Entire wars have been fought, genocides committed, and ideologies born out of shadows disowned at the collective level. And yet, even on the smallest scale, projection poisons your daily life. You meet someone who irritates you beyond reason. Why? Often because they embody something you've buried in yourself. The arrogant colleague reminds you of the confidence you never allowed yourself to claim. The needy friend mirrors the vulnerability you swore to hide. The person you despise may, in some twisted way, be the guardian of the very part of yourself you abandoned. Neurology deepens the insight. The brain is not a perfect narrator of truth. It is a survival machine. Cognitive biases skew your perception constantly. Confirmation bias makes you see only what fits the story you've always told yourself. The negativity bias makes pain stand out sharper than joy, ensuring you cling to wounds long after they've healed. The shadow exploits these biases. It ensures that the reality you perceive is not reality at all, but a distorted reflection of what you refuse to face. This is why the consequences feel invisible, because the shadow wears disguises. You call it bad luck, you call it my personality, you call it fate. But what if fate is simply the name you give to the patterns you haven't yet recognized? The emotional toll is devastating. Anxiety thrives in the gap between the mask you wear and the truth you deny. Depression often grows from years of silencing grief, rage, or longing. Addiction feeds on shadows, whether it's alcohol numbing unacknowledged pain, or endless scrolling numbing the dread of silence. Even physical illness sometimes emerges as the body's protest against what the psyche refuses to face. And perhaps the most haunting consequence of all, the slow erosion of meaning. When you live cut off from your shadow, life becomes thin, repetitive, strangely two-dimensional. You wake each day with a vague sense that something is missing, yet you cannot name it. You distract yourself, you chase goals, you collect moments of pleasure, but beneath it all, the emptiness persists. It is the silence of the exiled self, waiting to be heard. The tragedy is not just personal. Imagine millions of individuals, all carrying denied shadows. What kind of society does this create? A world obsessed with noise because silence is unbearable. A culture built on endless consumption because inner hunger is never satisfied. Leaders who wage wars not because of necessity, but because they are projecting their own inner demons onto the stage of history. The unseen consequence of unacknowledged shadows is nothing less than the perpetuation of human suffering on both intimate and global scales. And yet, in the midst of this, there is something strangely beautiful. The shadow does not give up. No matter how far you run, it follows. No matter how deep you bury it, it rises in dreams, in slips of the tongue, in the flicker of envy, in the moments of despair that pierce through your defenses. It is as if life itself conspires to make you whole again, no matter how much you resist. But here is the cruel twist. The more you resist, the harsher the consequences become. The shadow begins as a whisper, but if ignored, it becomes a scream. Ignore the scream, and it becomes a collapse of health, of love, of meaning. The shadow is not your enemy, but it will not be ignored. And so, the unseen consequences accumulate, pressing against the fragile walls of the life you've built. You sense it. You feel the pressure. Something is cracking. Something is demanding to be seen. The question now is whether you will continue the cycle or whether you will rebel. The rebellion, how to break free. At some point, the weight becomes unbearable. The patterns repeat too often. The emptiness grows too loud. The cracks in the mask widen. Something in you whispers, "This cannot be all there is." That whisper is the beginning of rebellion, the first spark of a fire that can burn through the chains of the unseen. But make no mistake, rebellion against the shadow is not about destruction. It is not about eradicating the parts of yourself you've learned to fear. It is about turning toward them, daring to meet the gaze of what you've denied, and refusing to live a half-life any longer. How do you begin? By doing the thing you've avoided your entire life, looking directly into the darkness. Jung spoke of this as shadow integration, the process of making the unconscious conscious. Imagine carrying a lantern into the caves of your psyche, illuminating the shapes that once terrified you. The monsters you expected revealed themselves to be wounded children, forgotten dreams, and silenced truths. They are not here to destroy you. They are here to be acknowledged, accepted, and reintegrated into the whole of who you are. But the act of rebellion begins even before this. It begins with courage, the courage to stop lying to yourself. You must shatter the comfortable illusions. I am fine. I am in control. I don't need to face this. Rebellion is the refusal to live in bad faith, the refusal to keep wearing a mask while your soul suffocates beneath it. Consider the myths of old. In nearly every culture, the hero must ascend into the underworld, confront the dragon, or journey into the dark forest. Why? Because those stories are not about slaying enemies outside, but about confronting what lies within. The dragon is your fear. The underworld is your unconscious. The dark forest is the territory of the shadow. And the treasure, the holy grail, the golden fleece, the resurrection is the wholeness that comes from daring to face it. This rebellion is not glamorous. It does not look like victory parades or triumphant declarations. It looks like sitting in silence with feelings you've always avoided. It looks like writing down the truths you've always denied. It looks like admitting to yourself that the anger you bury is real, that the envy you judge in others is present in you, that the longing you hide is more powerful than the mask you show. And yet, within this humble rebellion lies immense power. Because the moment you stop running, the shadow loses its grip. What once manipulated you in silence becomes visible, nameable, transformable. The anger you feared may become the force that defends your boundaries. The envy you denied may guide you toward your true desires. The grief you silenced may soften your heart into compassion. History gives us examples of such inner revolutions. Think of the mystics who retreated into solitude, not to escape the world, but to face themselves. Think of philosophers like Socrates, who declared that the unexamined life is not worth living. Think of survivors like Viktor Frankl, who, even in the hell of Auschwitz, discovered a freedom no one could strip away. The freedom to give meaning to suffering. Each of them, in their own way, rebelled against the forces that sought to keep them blind. This rebellion is not just personal, it is contagious. When one person begins to integrate their shadow, it ripples outward. They stop projecting hatred onto others, and compassion emerges. They stop chasing hollow achievements, and authenticity appears. They stop numbing themselves, and presence returns. Such a person becomes a mirror of possibility, showing others that freedom is not a dream, but a decision. And yet, you may resist. You may wonder, what if I don't have the strength? What if the shadows are too dark? But here is the paradox. Strength is not what you need before you face the shadow. Strength is what you discover by facing it. Courage does not mean the absence of fear. It means walking into the darkness with fear as your companion. The rebellion is not about slaying your shadow. It is about befriending it. Integration, not annihilation. To rebel against denial. To rebel against fragmentation is to reclaim yourself piece by piece until you are no longer at war within. Practical steps emerge from this philosophy. Begin with awareness. Observe your reactions, your triggers, your projections. When someone provokes you, ask, what part of myself am I seeing in them? When you feel a surge of emotion, ask, what truth is this pointing to? Then move to acceptance. Write the words you've never dared to say. Confess the truths you've never spoken. Allow yourself to feel what you once buried. Acceptance does not mean indulgence, it means recognition. A shadow named loses its power to haunt. Finally, act with integration. If your shadow holds anger, channel it into asserting your worth. If it holds envy, let it guide you toward your unlived potential. If it holds grief, let it teach you tenderness. In this way, what once bound you begins to liberate you. The rebellion is ongoing. It is not a single moment, but a way of living. Each day you choose whether to remain asleep or to awaken further. Each day you decide whether to continue the cycle of denial or to step into wholeness. And though the path is difficult, something extraordinary happens as you walk it. The world begins to shift. Relationships deepen. Joy returns, not as fleeting pleasure, but as a quiet radiance. Purpose emerges, not from external validation, but from alignment with your own truth. The rebellion against the unseen is not just survival. It is resurrection. It is the discovery that the darkness you feared was never your enemy. It was the doorway to yourself. And once you pass through that doorway, a final truth waits, one that will not just change how you live, but how you understand existence itself. The ultimate truth. You have walked through the darkness. You have seen the hidden problem, traced its roots, felt its consequences, and tasted the first rebellion against it. And now, at the edge of the journey, one final question lingers. What is the ultimate truth about the shadows you refuse to see? The answer is both devastating and liberating. The shadow is not separate from you, it is you. For all your life, you thought the shadow was an intruder, a flaw, an enemy to be conquered. But the truth is far more radical. The shadow is the other half of your being, the buried twin of your conscious self. You cannot destroy it without destroying yourself. To exile it is to exile. Your wholeness to deny it is to deny your humanity. And so the ultimate truth is this. To become fully human is to embrace the totality of who you are, the light and the dark, the noble and the shameful, the heroic and the broken. Every religion, every philosophy, every mythology has whispered this in its own way. The yin and the yang, the Christ who descends into hell, the Buddha who faces Mara beneath the Bodhi tree, the phoenix that burns before it rises. These are not just stories. They are mirrors of the human soul. They tell you that salvation, enlightenment, awakening, whatever word you choose, does not come from fleeing the shadow, but from embracing it. Here lies the paradox you were never told. The very things you fear within yourself are the seeds of your greatest strength. Your anger, once owned, becomes courage. Your envy, once understood, becomes direction. Your grief, once felt, becomes compassion. The cracks you try to hide are the very places where light can enter. But there is an even deeper truth, one that stretches beyond psychology into the heart of existence itself. The shadow is not only personal, it is cosmic. Think of the universe. Stars are born from collapsing darkness. Galaxies swirl in the void. Light exists only because of the contrast with night. The pattern is universal. Creation requires both forces. Why should your soul be any different? To deny your shadow is to deny the very structure of reality. You are not meant to be pure light or pure darkness. You are meant to be the meeting point where the two embrace. Carl Jung once said, "I'd rather be whole than good." To chase goodness alone is to chase a half-truth. Wholeness, on the other hand, is the integration of all opposites, the acceptance that you are a battlefield and a sanctuary, a wound and a healer, a question and an answer. This ultimate truth is difficult to accept because it shatters the illusion of control. It tells you that you are not a polished statue, but a living paradox. It demands that you stop pretending to be what you are not. It asks you to hold within yourself the contradictions you once thought irreconcilable, strength and weakness, love and fear, order and chaos. But here is the miracle. When you accept this paradox, peace arrives. Not the fragile peace of denial, but the deep peace of authenticity. You no longer waste energy fighting yourself. You no longer chase perfection. You no longer fear the darkness because you see that it was never the enemy, it was the hidden face of your own soul. The ultimate truth also changes how you see others. You realize that the people you despised were mirrors of your unclaimed parts. You realize that judgment is often just projection in disguise. Compassion awakens not as a moral duty, but as a natural recognition. They, too, are fighting their shadows. They, too, are fragments longing for wholeness. And on a collective scale, this truth offers the only real hope. A world built on denial will always collapse into cycles of violence, greed, and fear. But a world where individuals integrate their shadows can give birth to something new. Imagine leaders who are not enslaved by their unacknowledged fears. Imagine societies that no longer need scapegoats because they have faced their collective wounds. Imagine cultures that honor both vulnerability and strength, both silence and expression, both the shadow and the light. Is this utopian? Perhaps. But every transformation begins with one truth embraced, and that truth begins with you. So, what will you do with the shadows you refuse to see? Will you keep running, keep projecting, keep living half a life? Or will you turn, at last, to face them? The ultimate truth does not promise ease. It promises depth. It promises authenticity. It promises a life not of perfection, but of wholeness. And perhaps that is the real secret. Wholeness is what you've been seeking all along. Not success, not approval, not endless distractions. Wholeness, the union of all that you are. The journey does not end here. In fact, it begins here. For the shadow will always return in new forms, at new stages of life. Integration is not a single act, but a lifelong practice. Each time you grow, a new shadow emerges, waiting to be seen. But instead of fearing it, you can welcome it as an old companion, a guide disguised as darkness. The ultimate truth is not that the shadow disappears. It is that you no longer fear its presence. You learn to walk with it, speak with it, learn from it. you discover that it was never trying to destroy you, it was trying to make you whole. And so, as you leave this journey, remember, the shadows you refuse to see are not prisons, they are doors. Behind them waits the rest of you, the fullness of your being, the untapped depth of your existence. Step through. Because only when you embrace the totality of yourself, the light, the dark, the shadow, the flame, will you finally understand what it means to live.